On a quiet April morning, the hum of tires over steel stopped echoing through the Carbon River Canyon. The Fairfax Bridge, built in 1921, our link to Mount Rainier National Park, was suddenly closed. No warning, no time to prepare. Concrete barriers were rolled across the road, and with them, the end of an era. For hundreds of local residents, those barriers didn't just block traffic. They blocked history, livelihood, and connection. I'm Jamie Pololi, and this is Reconnecting Rainier. So in 1914, my great-grandmother came from Italy with her family, and her brother purchased the Wilkeson Cash Market. It was called something different at that time, and they had that until 1921. And then when my great-grandfather came over from Italy, they also were from Italy but came separately. They met in town, and then they eventually purchased the store, the Wilkeson Cash Market, in 1921. 1921 is also when the Fairfax Bridge was built, and so I can't imagine having a business in Wilkeson and then having that influx of travelers to come up to the mountain, since it's the gateway to Mount Rainier, the Carbon Glacier, and Mowage. And what's interesting is that the same time I tried to open it, closed, and when they opened theirs, it opened. So it is quite the amount of time that's gone by and all the things that have changed. It's interesting that happens to be the exact moment that I try to do the same thing 6 generations later, basically. But it is and was always like the biggest attraction to come here. All of our resources over time have left. So we had coal and we had sandstone and we've got logging, but really the mountain was the last piece that we had after coal mining left. April 14th, 2025. The Washington State Department of Transportation announced the Fairfax Bridge was unsafe and closed, effective immediately. Inspections have revealed severe corrosion in the bridge's truss members, a structure long rated poor and fracture critical. To the state, it was a safety precaution. To us, it was isolation. We've got 40 so residents that live full-time up here. There's pretty much 3 different neighborhoods or communities of where the houses sit. The average age, I say, would probably be 60 plus. These are retirees. There's caregivers that live up here. There's people that definitely want to be off-grid. And one of the things I hear often is people say, well, they want to be up there. You know, why are we doing all this for these residents when they want to be off-grid and don't want all the normal resources that somebody that like in town has? But the reality is they weren't off-grid. When the bridge was there, they were just a couple minutes from the bridge, a couple minutes from Carbonado, and then all of a sudden you're into civilization. So if I would have had the opportunity to purchase land up here and build a home, I absolutely would have, because the bridge originally was such a lifeline, and it was right there that you didn't feel like you were camping in the middle of nowhere or living in the middle of nowhere. Your resources were very close. When I look up at the Fairfax Bridge, what strikes me isn't the hype or the steel, it's the silence. A century ago, this arch was the sound of movement: trucks, hikers, miners, and families headed toward the Carbon Glacier. Today, it's quiet, and yet the stillness tells a story about how a bridge once celebrated for progress could be forgotten, even while listed as one of the nation's historic treasures. And because of that, it earned a place on the National Register of Historic Places, the country's official list of landmarks worth remembering. That sounds like protection, right? But here's where the story turns. Being on the National Register doesn't guarantee survival. It doesn't mean the state must preserve or even maintain it. It simply says this matters. But saying something matters and taking care of it, those are two very different things. When WASHDOT finally closed the Fairfax Bridge, it wasn't because of its age or its history. It was because of deferred maintenance, over 2 decades of it. The designation that was supposed to protect it couldn't prevent that neglect. Now, the same listing that celebrates the bridge's importance might slow the efforts to rebuild or restore it. So when a bridge like Fairfax starts to corrode, the state can still defer maintenance year after year. Listing doesn't unlock a preservation budget. It just adds a layer of paperwork when the time for replacement finally comes. That's the paradox. Because the bridge is on the National Register, any future project involving federal or state funds will take longer. So at the peak that I remember since I've been in town, which has been my whole life, but in 1998, I was able to walk uptown Wilkeson at the time, go to what we had was a contact station. It now is Nomad, but originally it was a Mount Rainier National Park contact station. So I was able to go up the day of and pick up my pass and head up to the Wonderland Trail. And at the time, you used to be able to drive all the way into the Carbon River entrance, all the way to the Ipsit campground. And so my grandfather picked us up. I went with my 8th grade teacher, Mary Robbins, and then a good friend of mine, Ashley Bridgeke, and we drove all the way up to Ipsit. They dropped us off, and then we went on the Wonderland Trail for several days. So that was a huge spot for people to go and to be able to get on the trail. Well, just a few years later after that, that actually all washed out. We had a crazy flood, and they never rebuilt that road. And so now you cannot, you are not able to actually go all the way into Ipsit anymore. You've got to travel quite a ways to get to the campground, either by foot or on bike. So at that point, you're starting to think, that they didn't fix it. They're just leaving it. And it feels a little like they're doing the same thing with the bridge. It's like eventually they're kind of closing everything off. Short term is this access road and making sure that it's safe. We anticipate, the bridge being rebuilt, which means this 5 to 7 years is going to be the main access road for this community. I'd love to make it the best gated community around and safety features. And so receiving the grant from the Department of Commerce is huge. Getting those gates in that are automatic. We'll have lights at those gates, Wi-Fi at those gates. That's really important. A lot of the grants that you find that are out right now aren't for preventative emergencies. They're not preventative in ways of making sure that if something happens, we have this set up. It's really reactive. And so wanting also outside of the communication funding that we got and these gates to find funding to be able to make sure they have everything they need if so. Another piece is a secondary access point out of here. There is no other way out. I want to make sure that we start to have partners in this rebuild of the bridge. I don't need to secure $160 million overnight. What I need to do is secure partnerships on a state level, a federal level, the Park Service, DOI, people that really want this bridge rebuilt to make sure that we get that lined up and there really is no avoiding not building. It really should be the only option. Long term, we want this bridge restored. We want the bridge back to not even just what it was, but a bridge that will be built to last and then maintained over the years so we don't get to this situation again. If I love this town enough to live here, am I willing to fight for it too?
That old commercial brick building I bought to restore became something more. The year before the bridge closure, I turned it into a nonprofit, the Wilkeson Historical District, to help preserve our town's heritage and strengthen local businesses. I never imagined it would go on to play one of the biggest roles in Wilkeson's modern history. What started as a small effort to honor the past became the center of a movement to protect our future and to remind the world that Wilkeson still matters. This isn't about a bridge. It's about accountability, about how infrastructure decisions ripple through real lives. It's about small towns like ours that stand up, organize, and demand to be seen. The Fairfax Bridge closed a road, but it opened our eyes. How residents took on bureaucracy and state systems, how new legislation could reshape rural access, and how throughout it all, community found its voice.